What is going on, Scan Fam? Welcome to another episode of the Cryptocurrent. Today, we are joined by Sherwin Jiang, the head of gaming partnerships at Aptos Labs. Sherwin, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Evan. My pleasure, Dennis. Nice to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, great to have you. Can you kind of kick us off, give us some of your background, what got you into crypto, and what exactly your role is at Aptos?
Yeah, sure. So I got into crypto through gaming. Before Aptos, for my job at Aptos Labs, I was actually an investment banker. I was at Morgan Stanley for about 7 years. I covered a bit of software, but my passion was always gaming. I was a big gamer growing up. I loved playing all the classics on Super Nintendo. Was really into esports in college. So worked on a lot of the deals that, we Morgan Stanley did in gaming, like the Roblox direct listing, the Unity Iron Source acquisition.
Nice.
I just thought gaming was really going somewhere. And it seemed like one of the big steps in gaming's evolution was kind of Web3 and blockchain and what it could bring. And so I joined Aptos Labs as head of gaming partnerships and have been doing my best to bring Web3 to the masses ever since.
Awesome. So how do you see blockchain being able to transform games, both for developers and users? What kind of new opportunities are going to rise out of the integration of this technology? And kind of what are the interfaces going to be able to adapt?
Yeah, I feel like gaming is a pretty interesting industry because I think gaming has one kind of macro pattern it follows, right? In gaming, there's kind of a three-step pattern. There's a technological innovation. The technological innovation allows for some sort of like business model transformation. And then the business model transformation allows for different types of games that kind of refine on that economic model until kind of like a new type of game emerges. And then that cycle just kind of drives itself, right? So if you think about what happened for free to play games with kind of, mobile and internet and updaters allowed for this new type of game where instead of selling you one game for like $50 or whatever, you could get pretty much most of the game for free and you monetize with like in-game assets, right? That kind of gave birth to this whole wave of like mobile casual games, Candy Crush, Clash of Clans, Angry Birds, all that stuff. And if you look at the gaming industry today, 50% is like made of mobile, right? So that was like a business model innovation that kind of dramatically changed all of games. I think Web3 has the same potential, where it was kind of blockchain technology. And we're in this phase right now where we're really figuring out what like a new economic model for games can be. And I think that's going to unleash just a whole different set of games that we haven't seen before. And it's going to be really exciting for the industry.
Awesome. Now while the industry is still emerging, we see games succeed. We've seen some games crash and burn pretty hard. Can you share any success stories or use cases where game developers have been able to leverage blockchain technology and do something that would have not been otherwise possible within a game?
Yeah, Evan, like you said, we're still in super early innings of this. So I think a lot of the big projects that people talk a lot about, Shrapnel being one of them, right? Are just kind of still, they aren't even launching yet. They will kind of be in the future. But I think we're starting to see glimpses of things that are, really exciting for games, right? And I'll share two of them right now. One of them is this new token standard that came out. I believe it was called ERC 2981, which allows for creators of certain assets to continue to monetize on secondary transactions of those assets, right? And people talk about UGC in games, user-generated content in games all the time. But I think having something like that is a huge multiplier in how creators are going to be able to, can monetize and continue to monetize in their creations going forward. So that's a pretty big potential that I see for blockchain. The other one is something that we've recently built on Aptos in collaboration with one of our partners, which is a Korean studio called NPixel. And it's pretty much a token standard that we've been calling Token V2 that allows for NFTs to be put at the same level as users. And what that does is it allows NFTs to hold other NFTs. So you can imagine, for example, if your character is a tradable asset, he or she could have like items, swords, armors that come with them, right? And it comes packaged into like a new NFT that can be traded or sold.
Right.
So that whole crafting element is a pretty interesting thing that was not possible before. So it's a lot of these innovations that are kind of around the corner, haven't really been utilized yet, but really excited about.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. That idea of having a NFT with other NFTs attached to it, I think, is amazing, and it does seem very applicable in the world of games. Now, as Web3 and the gaming communities are still rather separated, like sure, there's a lot of congruency as far as people involved in Web3. A lot of them tend to be gamers. However, I would say majority of gamers are not so interested in Web3. What initiatives do you think need to happen for that bridge to be crossed?
Yeah, I think for those two worlds to really be bridged more effectively, Web3 games just kind of have to look more like Web2 games. They have to look and feel more like Web2 games. I think gamers are used to a certain pattern, and putting barriers in front of them for people to adopt new technology has never been effective,
For
right?
sure.
Adopting onto Web3 is today pretty challenging, and you've got a lot of tools that make it easier. But when you go and sign up for a wallet, it's like, here's a sentence, write it down, never
Right.
forget it. Once you do,
Yeah.
everything is gone,
Yeah.
right? Who wants that? And if you think
Yeah.
about gamers, one of the biggest demographic changes we've had is, I think, something like 40% of millennials and older identify as gamers, right? Those are not people who want to risk like losing all of their digital assets because they forgot to write down their password somewhere. So I think making that onboarding process a lot more effective and smooth, and doing things like, email sign in with an automatic custodial wallet created, those kind of things can, I think, grease the wheels a lot to help those two worlds be more seamless.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We are seeing things slowly get easier for the user. Coinbase is making some huge strides. But yeah, Web3 games have really kind of just gotten the tail end of that ease of use. Things are still quite complicated there. Web3 games don't look like Web2 games yet. You are right. So how do different blockchains enable different capabilities within games? We hear all the time about Ethereum's issues with scaling. We also hear about layer 2s such as Polygon, Aptos, and tons more. So what exactly are some of the benefits of utilizing a different chain versus, say, Ethereum, for example?
Well, I think the Aptos chain comes with a lot of advantages, and I think two of the most basic ones are just like speed and reliability, right? So Aptos is built on a language called Move, and it has a built-in consensus mechanism that allows for transactions to be verified a lot faster. Aptos is independently verified by a third party called Messari as the network as having one of the lowest times to finality. So that's how quickly a transaction is, permanently logged on the chain,
Mm-hmm.
and the highest number of transactions per second, right? So if you're a game that has, high numbers of users, a very high volume of transactions, then I think that's all. I think Aptos is kind of, the chain for you. So be interested in having a conversation there.
Makes sense.
Do you have any recommendations for folks? I feel like there's a lot of Web2 companies that are trying to explore Web3 gaming, and what would it be like if you could make like a couple recommendations of where to start, how to begin, and just like what are some of the biggest hurdles right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I kind of think about chains. Maybe this isn't a perfect analogy, but I think of chains like a public cloud almost, right? It's pretty well understood what kind of the benefits and the pricing of, say, an AWS versus a GCP versus a Microsoft Azure is. I think for blockchains, that information is a lot harder to get just because, like we said, we're in such early stages. So I think really it starts with thinking about what kind of game you want to build, right? Are you a game where you have, massive numbers of users? Are you a game where you're writing to the chain constantly, where, you have lots of transactions happening? Or are you a chain that, doesn't interact with the chain very often and has kind of like a limited number of on-chain elements, right?
Yeah.
I think all of those it should point you towards what are kind of the things that you need. So like, should you optimize for like speed, or should you optimize for gas fees or something like that? So comes with a basic understanding and then kind of matching what each chain has to offer.
Makes sense. So as Web3 games get more advanced, and as more Web2 players become interested, what are some of the things that both sides of the same coin can look forward to in the upcoming advancement of Web3 games?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of exciting things that are ahead in the future. We haven't really we've only really scraped the tip of the iceberg on what people have. But I think one of the things that, we've talked a lot about is like the ownership, the true ownership of assets, right?
Mhm.
Right now, when you stop playing a game, your terminal value or your residual value, if you want to call it, of this game goes to zero, right?
Right.
What if it wasn't? And what if, after you played this game, it was very easy for you to sell your assets, sell your accounts, sell even the game itself, right? To the level that you're at to someone else. I think that would make, it a lot more easier to get into games, to explore games, knowing that, if you ever stop playing, it's not like $50 or how much money you've spent into the game going down the drain, right? So I think that's going to potentially have an effect of increasing the number of gamers in the world even more, which I think is a great thing. There's a very human element of games. Games brings us together, and I think, a lot of the problems in the world could be solved if people played more games.
For sure. I mean, something I personally think about Web3 games is I think it would be awesome to see like a high level of interoperability with in-game assets, right? So like, for example, the NFTs that can hold NFTs like you were talking about. What if I could use that in Call of Duty, and since it's Web3 now, I can also use it in like GTA, just that interoperability of assets.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about interoperability as something that Web3 can bring. I think it's definitely a possibility. I think it's a little bit further off than some of these other things that we're talking about because it requires like a high level of coordination between games of different, publishers, or even the games of the same publishers, which is still challenging. But yeah, and that would be a really cool thing to see.
For sure.
As a gamer yourself, like what excites you about this space? I know you mentioned about like owning your assets, but like just what are some other things that you can kind of speak about that truly like excite you in this space around gaming and Web3?
Yeah, I think, gaming in terms of having like I think games in terms of having like guilds and more like more like persistent lore in a game is one thing. We talked to this one gaming studio that had a really interesting idea of having items of like mythical rare quality, but somehow like the history of ownership was embedded in that item, kind of like how in Game of Thrones or whatever, right? The great swords of the houses have been like passed down from person to person. They were talking about this idea of what if there's this sword where it says, hey, on this day, this sword was used by this player to beat, whatever raid. And that was the first time it had been done on that server. That was a really cool idea to me. So I think making just, the ownership of assets in the gaming world more tied to ownership of assets in the real world. And, who knows, maybe you meet someone in the game and it's like, oh man, you had this sword at some point too. So did I. Just having that connection. That's a really, magical gaming moment to me. And so I would love to see some of that.
And also streamers can also benefit from that. Like, wouldn't you want like, I don't know, ninjas or Tifus or whatever of the world, like their assets? Imagine like having it, or blockchain can play a huge role there. So, I mean, that excites me. I like gaming. I know a lot of people on our team love gaming. So it's interesting to see how like you can also connect with other people. A lot of our team has met like through gaming also. So it's very interesting to kind of see these worlds collide.
Definitely.
Well, I think it's super exciting, super interesting stuff. Gaming has kind of flown under the radar as of recent. I mean, a year, 2 years ago, Crazy Bull Run gaming was a huge aspect of that. But I think that is one major sector that's really going to start to see some traction once things truly develop to their full potential. I mean, even in their current potential, there are quite a few playable games. They're not quite the level of Web2 games, but they are getting there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're just in early days, and there's a pretty bright future, I think, for gaming ahead of us. Web3 gaming's had a rocky road so far, but I think it's important to remember that no technology comes out of the gate like perfected, right? Gaming is an industry where things are constantly being experimented on. And so I think it's too early to call it one way or another, but let's be cautious but real optimistic, and hopefully we build great things.
Awesome. Well, Sherwin, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. Great conversation. We'll go ahead and leave all of your links in the description, some information about Aptos, where people can contact you, where people can check out Aptos. And yeah, thanks again for hopping on the podcast. This has been the CoinScan team coming at you guys with another episode of the Crypto Current. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, check out the CoinScan communities, and we will see you next week.